When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I had checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet. But she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I look nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I'd seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all of his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I look like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long, awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker. Max Barker. Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it doesn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and she started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast, and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it, to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk, and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed, and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit the guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received 40+ text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" to, "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out. I am not one to have a great memory. Most things from my childhood I tend to forget, but this little event I could never forget. So it starts off in Texas at a relative's farm, at least 14 years back during the summer. My family and I were just starting to move, and since my brother and I were kind of small and not exactly helpful with moving stuff like furniture, we had to stay with our aunt, who is my dad's sister, and my uncle, who recently married my aunts and their son. I was around 6 years old and my cousin was 12. My brother was 14. The three of us used to help out with many of the animals that were at the farms to waste time, but whenever our aunts and uncles say they didn't need our help, we would run off and do our own thing, which in other words meant going out with our slingshots. This one day, our uncle told us that we could stay out as late as we wanted, so this meant we didn't have to come back before sundown like we usually did. The three of us, my cousin, my brother, and I, decided that we were going to go out as far as we possibly could from that farm and practice with their flimsy slingshots. Looking back at this, it's kind of funny how the three of us thought we could get anything and everything with a rickety slingshot. After a couple of hours and not finding anything and being at least a mile or two from the farm, we decided to go back. On the way back, we saw what we all thought was a coyote on the way back, near the chicken pen. Seeing that it would take a long time to grab our uncle, the three of us with our flimsy slingshots tried to take care of it. Big mistake. The coyote turned around and started to slowly walk at us. The closer it got, the bigger it seemed to get. And soon I realized that it was not a coyote but some sort of creature with some long wire-like hair, red all over its face. It was out of nowhere. My brother dropped his slingshot, grabbed me and started bolting towards the house with our cousin following behind, screaming at us to run. I can't remember how long it took us to actually make it inside that house, but I was so happy to make it inside. Whatever that thing was, it stayed outside watching us. It wasn't until our aunt saw it outside that it left. My aunt thought it was just a coyote, but my cousin was sure it was a skinwalker. Our uncle sided with him on whatever it was. My uncle was a Navajo and didn't joke about this stuff, but my brother, my aunt, and I weren't. My cousin, who grew up learning about these legends, kept telling him that it was a skinwalker until he was bawling his eyes out. Our uncle decided to believe him and fortify the house the best he could that night. The next day we went outside and found all the chickens torn apart outside their pens. My parents came that same day to pick up my brother and I, mainly because our uncle was calling them frantically and they worried about our safety. I rarely keep in touch with those relatives anymore due to my family moving all those years ago, and whenever I do, we never bring up the incident anymore, out of fear that it may have actually been a skinwalker.